You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 14th of March 2014. Rotherham's Brinsworth Manor infant and junior schools ban pork in favour of halal. Illegal immigrant robbed and raped woman in Plymouth. Nigel Farage denies being forced out of marital home after affair claims. Italy prosecutor seeks 20-year jail term for pickaxe killer. Brussels frees up €12 billion for Italy. The Ukraine this week, independence, aggression, natural gas, water and electricity. Nick Griffin MEP from the belly of the beast. Alabama judge to lesbian couple, no, you can't divorce. Mugabe parties lavishly on broke Zimbabwe's dime daughter's wedding cost $5 million, his own birthday $1 million. Thought for the day, a total blackout on TV and a total takeover in the US. And finally, an early Halloween joke. UK News. Rotherham's Brinsworth Manor infant and junior schools ban pork in favour of halal. Parents have condemned the school's decision to ban all pork products from the menu and replace other meats with halal versions. Pupils aged between 3 and 11 at Brinsworth Manor infant and junior schools in Rotherham, which Ofsted identifies as having only a small number of pupils from minority ethnic groups, will no longer be able to enjoy sausages, bacon or ham. Parents at both schools, which share a site, were told of the decision in a letter from Rotherham's Council's principal catering officer, Ron Parry, who wrote that there had been minor adjustments to the lunch menu. Although just 20% of the school's 600 pupils are Muslim, the menu changes were reportedly brought in to make the school more inclusive. A mother with an 11-year-old girl at the school who asked not to be named for fear of being branded racist said, "At home I pay more for organic and free-range food. I am a Christian but I don't do it because of that, it's more for respect of how animals are killed. The majority of the children are now having school meals that are made for the minority." World at 8. It is just plain disgusting and there should be massive protests, but of course there won't be. We just don't care anymore. The school had probably banned Pippa the Pig as well. Illegal immigrant robbed and raped woman in Plymouth. An illegal immigrant was found guilty of raping and robbing a prostitute in Plymouth's red light area. Balen Wazoo, aged 22, violently attacked the woman after paying her for a sex act, the city's Crown Court heard. The Iraqi-born man faces a long jail term and deportation after a jury convicted him following a trial. Wazoo turned on the woman after he met her for sex at the streets in Stonehouse last year. He raped the prostitute, covering her mouth as she screamed for help. Wazoo then tried to snatch back money from her pocket, including the £50 he'd paid minutes before. He then bit the woman's hand when she tried to stop him. Wazoo of Bayswater Road, Stonehouse, spent a week on trial after denying rape and robbery. World at 8. She should have done the world a favour and bitten off something else. Nigel Farage denies being forced out of marital home after affair claims. His wife, Kirsten Mayer, who usually drives him to the station, was keeping a low profile following allegations that her husband had an affair with his press officer, Annabel Fuller. Mr Farage, who was pictured carrying a bag outside his home in Kent, later denied he'd been kicked out by his wife after a fellow MEP claimed that his former mistress is on his taxpayer-funded payroll. The UK Independence Party leader said it was ridiculous and insane to suggest that he'd been asked to move out. "It's ridiculous," he said. "I left home at 11 o'clock, I came to work. This is completely insane, it is a load of whatevers." Meanwhile, a video emerged in which Mr Farage boasts about how he is paid more than a Goldman Sachs banker because he employs his wife as a secretary. The video, which dates from 1999, shows Mr Farage saying that everyone's a winner with Europe. The emergence of the video has fuelled UKIP concerns that the Conservative Party are orchestrating a smear campaign against Mr Farage and members of his party. In the video, Mr Farage is seen fanning himself with banknotes and criticising the expenses regime in the European Parliament. That for 4 working days and making one's journey he can claim £1,900. He adds it's a good job this. I worked it out that because so much of what you get is after tax, that if you use the secretarial allowances to pay your wife on top of all the other games you play, I reckon this job in sterling terms is worth over £250,000 a year to you. That is what you would need to earn working for Goldman Sachs or someone like that. Mr Farage's German-born second wife Kirsten Meyer is employed by him on a salary of up to £20,000 a year using EU parliamentary assistant allowances that are worth almost £220,000. Miss Fuller is paid out of the allowance as a local assistant working at UKIP's London press office. World at 8. This is not the cons, as it has been well known in political circles for years how Farage treats his job as an MEP, just about the same way he treats his women and some of his followers badly. It isn't an unsaid message that puts the pound sign on his party logo. He is at least being honest there. Feed me, people, feed me. Frankly, I cannot imagine any woman at any age being attracted to Farage, even if he was jewelled in every hole. European news. Italy prosecutor seeks 20-year jail term for pickaxe killer. Milan prosecutor Isidoro Palmer on Monday sought a 20-year jail term for Adam Kabobo, a Ghanaian man who killed 3 people with a pickaxe last year. The state attorney supported a defence plea of diminished responsibility and asked that the defendant, who has been diagnosed as schizophrenic, spend 6 years in a clinic after he serves his jail term. Murder Adam Kabobo went on a rampage with a pickaxe at dawn on May 11, 2013, killing 3 passers-by in an apparently random attack. The 21-year-old was taken into custody shortly after the attacks in a residential area on the northern outskirts of Milan. A Milan judge previously found that Kabobo knew what he was doing at the time of the rampage. The young killer later tried to strangle his cellmate in Milan's San Vittorio prison, telling authorities he did it because he was hearing voices. World at 8. Have the Italians gone soft? Deport him back to Ghana or hang him, simple. Brussels frees up to €12 billion for Italy. The European Union announced Monday that €12 billion have been freed up for Italy through renegotiation of a 2007-2013 regional budget programme between the EU and Italy. Italy was originally expected to co-finance fully 50%, but in a statement, EU Commissioner of Regional Policy Johan Hahn said it has lowered the rate to 25%. To date, Italy has used only about 54% of available funds, meaning about €12 billion could still be accessed so long as it finances its 25% share of eligible projects. The Ukraine this week: independence, aggression, natural gas, water and electricity. Crimea Parliament declares independence from Ukraine ahead of referendum. The Parliament of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea has adopted an independence declaration from Ukraine, which is necessary for holding a March 16th referendum. We, the members of the Parliament of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea and the Sevastopol City Council, with regard to the Charter of the United Nations and a whole range of other international documents, and taking into consideration the confirmation of the status of Kosovo by the United Nations International Court of Justice on July 22, 2010, which says that unilateral declaration of independence by a part of the country doesn't violate any international norms. Make this a decision, says the text of the declaration, which was published by the Crimean media. The document was adopted during an extraordinary session of Parliament. 78 of 100 members of the Parliament voted in favour of the declaration. The Crimean Parliament's vote to become an independent sovereign state paves the way for the March 16th referendum for the Crimean Autonomous Republic and the city of Sevastopol to join Russia. Ukraine appeals to US and UK to counter Russian aggression. Ukraine's Parliament on Tuesday appealed to Washington and London, urging them to utilise all diplomatic, political, economic and military means to counter Russian intervention on the Crimean Peninsula and to preserve the nation's territorial integrity. The parliamentary resolution was addressed to the US and UK as signatories, along with Russia, of the 1994 Budapest Memorandum, in which newly independent Ukraine surrendered its vast Soviet nuclear arsenal in return for territorial integrity guarantees. EU puts brakes on Russia natural gas pipelines. The European Union has slammed the brakes on 2 big Russian pipeline projects to supply more natural gas to Europe as part of its efforts to turn up the heat on Moscow over its incursion into Crimea. The move will deal a blow to Russia's ambitions of increasing its gas exports and bypassing Ukraine as a transit country. It comes as the 28-country bloc is weighing other options to reduce its dependence on Russian natural gas, which accounts for over a third of EU supplies. 6 EU countries, including Bulgaria and Lithuania, depend exclusively on Russia for natural gas. Vote to join Russia could leave Crimea without water and electricity. As Russia's stranglehold on Crimea tightens, the Ukrainian province to the north is warning it could make life on the peninsula miserable if the coveted region chooses sides with Moscow in Sunday's referendum. Pro-Moscow officials in Crimea, who favour secession from Ukraine, have said they will seize all utilities and assets owned by the Kiev-based Ukrainian government if the referendum goes as expected. But Crimea's electricity, fresh water and natural gas all flows in from the province of Kherson, where leaders warn they will shut everything off if the referendum they say is illegitimate goes forward. World at 8. This is what the world counts on, white against white. Talk over a table and don't let the UN or EU anywhere near. They have a different agenda, one that will not end well. Belly of the beast. I now hand you over to Nick Griffin, MEP, who follows up on his controversial talk in the EU Parliament and the white genocide plan at the heart of the European Union.
I caused something of a stir in Parliament this week with my 60-second ration of speaking time during a debate about making life even easier for asylum seekers. I considered making a speech with the usual populist Daily Mail style soundbites in it, but decided in the end to do something different. So it turned out to be a no-holds-barred attack on the way that asylum, like all the other reasons for mass non-white immigration, is in fact nothing more than an excuse. And the real reason behind the whole thing is a deliberate plot of ethnocide or genocide against the white peoples of Europe, in fact the white peoples of the world, but including, and particularly of concern to us of course, the British. I hope you'll have a listen to the whole speech. It actually took up 1 minute 8 seconds. I deliberately ran over time because I wanted to get gavelled by the chairman for dramatic effect. Unfortunately, the chairman was very lax and he let me carry on to the end of the speech. So that bit didn't work. But nevertheless, I think the speech did. It's really, it's all over the internet. An awful lot of people are promoting it. It really has struck a chord. But it starts with a mention of one Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, a name which may be new to some of you. So I thought I'd speak today a little bit about Kalergi, and in doing so, provide the backup evidence for the remarkable claims that I made in my speech, that not just the European Union's nation-destroying operation, but also the people-destroying operation, actually come from the same source. So, Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, who was he? He was born in 1894, the son of an Austrian noble, a close friend of Theodor Herzl, the founder of the Zionist movement. His father had himself very mixed ancestry of various European noble families and a Spanish Jewish banking dynasty. He went to Japan as a diplomat and hooked up with a Japanese woman, and their son was Richard. Young Richard dodged the call-up in World War I, claiming weak lungs, although he did manage to live until 1972, so I think he probably had a good doctor to sign some papers for him. He was groomed as the front man, pushing for a united Europe. He's seen by the naive as the father of the modern European Union, as if he invented it all himself. It certainly was he who suggested that Beethoven's Ode should be used as the EU's anthem, and he was also apparently very active in connection with the design of the EU logo. He was hugely influential in setting in motion the creation of the European Union as something which he aimed from the very beginning would become a United States of Europe. And yet this man was scarcely out of university when he was meeting top politicians and press barons all over the Western world. It really isn't credible that this was all just him. And in fact, that's not the case. He was groomed by very powerful people to be a frontman, as his autobiography reveals. Quote, "At the beginning of 1924, we received a call from Baron Louis de Rothschild. One of his friends, Max Warburg from Hamburg, had read my book and wanted to get to know us. To my great surprise, Warburg spontaneously offered us 60,000 gold marks to tide the movement over for its first 3 years. Max Warburg arranged his 1925 trip to the United States to introduce me to Paul Warburg and financier Bernard Baruch." Unquote. cognoscenti will recognise the name Bernard Baruch. If you don't know really what it implies, Google it and go and have a look. I do hope you enjoy your journey of discovery into the people who really run and created the modern world. Coudenhove-Kalergi went on to say that, quote, Max Warburg was one of the most distinguished and wisest men I'd ever come into contact with, and he made a principle of financing these movements. Well, yes, actually the Warburgs did make a principle of financing various movements, not just this one. The Warburgs Bank had close family and business ties with Coudenhove-Co, another merchant bank, whose top man, Jacob Schiff, financed the Bolshevik coup against Russia. In other words, he let loose one of the murderous, most psychotic regimes in human history. The son of the Warburg who Coudenhove-Kalergi knew, James Paul Warburg, went on to say notoriously before the US Senate in 1950, quote, "We shall have world government whether we like it or not. The only question is whether world government will be achieved by conquest or consent." He actually didn't mean whether we like it or not. He meant whether you like it or not, because world government is what these criminals are all about. Kalergi set out the first set of his ideas in a book called Praktischer Idealismus, Practical Idealism, published in Vienna in 1925. And many of his most important ideas are in that. In particular, as I mentioned in my speech, his aim of destroying the nations of Europe and replacing them with the United States of Europe, but also parallel to that, an equally ruthless drive to destroy the peoples of Europe through mass immigration and miscegenation. Don't take my word for it. Look at the book, if of course you can find it. Quote, "The man of the future will be a mongrel. Today's races and classes will disappear owing to the disappearance of space, time and prejudice. The Eurasian Negroid race of the future, similar in its outward appearance to the ancient Egyptians, will replace the diversity of peoples with the diversity of individuals." That's what he was about. And he was talking about this specifically for the peoples of Europe. He was saying the peoples of Europe should be replaced. Our diversity of peoples should be replaced with a Eurasian Negroid hybrid. This vision of mass genetic modification was for everybody, for all of us in Europe, but not for an elite. Who would the elite be who would govern over this raceless, faceless rabble? Well, according to Coudenhove-Kalergi, it's very clear. Europe's spiritual Führerrasse, leader race, the Jews. Coudenhove-Kalergi went on to say this about the people that he envisaged taking over the running of the whole show. Through unspeakable persecutions throughout a millennium, Christian Europe tries to exterminate the Jewish people. The result was that all Jews who were weak-willed, opportunistic or sceptical let themselves be baptized in order to escape the torment of endless persecution. On the other hand, all Jews who were not skilled, clever and creative enough to survive this struggle for their existence under these many times harder conditions of life succumbed. Thus, in the end, from all these persecutions arose a small community shaped by heroically endured martyrdom for the idea and cleansed of all weak-willed individual elements and poverty of mind. Instead of destroying Jewry, Europe, against its own will, refined and educated this people into a future leader nation through this artificial selection process. No wonder that this people, once they escaped their ghetto prison, developed into a spiritual nobility of Europe. Thus, a gracious providence provided Europe with a new race of nobility through spiritual grace. Unquote. What staggering racist arrogance. And Coudenhove-Kalergi also allied it to good old-fashioned snobbery, because he was very conscious of his father's roots in noble families all over Europe. So he said that from the ordinary Europeans, who he referred to as quantity people, sneering at us as only believing in numbers, the masses, there are actually only two quality races rising up to rule them, the old blood aristocracy and Jewry. And the latter, to Coudenhove-Kalergi, were more important, because, and I quote, "the superiority of their spirit predestines them to become a main factor of the future nobility." Unquote. He went on to say, and to praise the way in which how modern Jewry also surpasses all other peoples in percentage of important men. Scarcely 1 century after its liberation, this small people stands with Einstein at the front runner of modern science, with Mahler as the front runner of modern music, with Bergson as the front runner of modern philosophy, with Trotsky as the front runner of modern politics. Bergson as a philosopher, I've never even heard of him. But Trotsky, of course, Lev Bronstein, was the butcher of Kronstadt, the man who created the Red Army and first instituted the Red Terror, which went on to murder millions upon millions upon millions of people, first in Eastern Europe and then wider. This willingness to be basically happy about Trotsky is interesting in Coudenhove-Kalergi. It foreshadows the US neocon movement, in which Trotskyite Jewish intellectuals switched sides to become arch-capitalists because they perceived it, either consciously or subconsciously, as being in the interests of their people. In fact, as Kalergi noted, there was very little difference between the two sides in the first place. Quote, "Strength of character paired with sharpness of the mind predestines the Jews in the most excellent specimens to become the leaders of urbane humanity, the protagonists of capitalism as well as of the revolution." I continue to quote, "Capitalism and communism are both rational, both mechanical, both abstract, both urbane. The military nobility has definitely outplayed its role. The effect of the spirit, the power of the spirit, the belief in the spirit, the hope for the spirit is growing, and with it, this new aristocracy. The fight between capitalism and communism over the inheritance of the failing blood aristocracy is a fratricidal war of the victorious brain aristocracy, a fight between individualistic and socialist, egotist and altruist, heathen and Christian spirit. And the general staff of both parties is recruited from Europe's spiritual leader race, Führerrasse, the Jews." I continue to quote, "The prominent position held by Jewry these days is owed to its spiritual supremacy, which enables it to win the spiritual battle over enormous superior numbers of favoured, hateful, jealous individuals. As a people, Jewry experiences the eternal struggle of quantity against quality, inferior groups against high-quality individuals, inferior majorities against superior minorities." Look at those key words, spiritual supremacy. Inferior majorities, that's thee and me, against superior minorities. That's the people who Coudenhove-Kalergi idealised. This man, although not Jewish himself, was a fanatic Jewish racist supremacist who hated everybody else and wanted to see us bred out of existence. And yesterday I managed to get that into a speech of 1 minute, 8 seconds, which I think was quite good actually. Having given you this overview, I want to make one thing crystal clear. This is not a call to anti-Semitism. Coudenhove-Kalergi had some small Jewish ancestry, and yes, he identified very strongly with Judaism. In fact, he basically made a god out of the Jews, whether they liked it or not. But he was not Jewish. He did not speak for ordinary Jews, any more than do the Zionist and Talmudic criminals, now so prominent in various world evils, such as banking and neocon warmongering. And there's nothing more that these criminals want than for those who would expose and resist their looting and their hatred to fall into the trap of making themselves look ridiculous, unfair and bigoted by blaming all Jews for the evil done by some Jews and some people who'd like to be Jews, like Coudenhove-Kalergi. As a parallel, whenever people criticise the mafia for its criminality and its violence and the damage it's done to, for instance, Italian or American society, it's taken for granted that, at least in the origins, they're talking about people who were Italian criminals. And when someone criticises the mafia, there is no way in which they are criticising Italians. And yet that's what's done, that's the rhetorical trick that's played. If you criticise Zionism, it's said that you're attacking Jews. Not so, because Zionism is not Jewishness. Zionism is not even Jewish nationalism, because proper nationalism recognises and accepts that all peoples have rights. All peoples have the right to their place under the sun. And Zionism doesn't do that. Zionism isn't nationalism. It's a sort of racist fascism. It's not a political ideology. It's certainly not a religious thing, of religious origin. It's a sort of mafia. The EU, founded by Coudenhove-Kalergi, isn't Jewish. It's a secular evil, which has some of its roots in Coudenhove-Kalergi's cranky vision of a mixed slave race governed by a Jewish elite. But the EU project also has roots in the Habsburg Catholic tradition. Coudenhove-Kalergi, interestingly, went to the Habsburg school in Vienna, where young men were trained to become the leaders of the future, to preserve and encourage the power of the Habsburg monarchy. Now long gone, but the mentality is still there. More recently, it's very clear that both the CIA and the KGB sought to shape and use the EU for their all ends. The thing has gone beyond any of its founders. It's an evil imperialistic machine that transcends races, religions, political doctrines and conspiracies. Others have tried to co-opt and use it. They're still trying to co-opt and use it, but it's developed an organic life of its own. Fortunately, it's nearing the end of that life. But that, my friends, is another story for another day. Thanks for listening.
Thank you very much, Nick, and have a good weekend. World news. Alabama judge to lesbian couple, no, you can't divorce. A lesbian couple is caught in a weird vortex of differing laws on gay marriage. They want a divorce but can't do so legally. Michelle Richmond and Kirsten Alice Richmond got married in Iowa in 2012 but later moved to Alabama, which doesn't recognise same-sex marriage. Yesterday, a county judge in Huntsville dismissed their divorce request because, in the state's eyes, they were never married in the first place, reports al.com. The woman's attorney plans to appeal under the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. This ruling is based simply on the gender of these two women, he says. The women can't just head back to Iowa for a divorce either, notes NBC News. Iowa requires a year of legal residence before granting a divorce, and the women would have had to start from scratch because they've been in Alabama for a while now. Mugabe parties lavishly on broke Zimbabwe's dime. Daughter's wedding cost $5 million, his own birthday $1 million. Zimbabwe's economy is in the tank, and recent flooding that stranded 60,000 people hasn't helped. The country already has $11 billion in overdue loans, and it's not eligible for World Bank and IMF assistance to obtain a needed $20 million in disaster relief. China appears to have bailed out on a rumoured bailout, yet somehow President Robert Mugabe has found enough in taxpayer coffers to fund his daughter's $5 million wedding, not to mention a 5 million pair of North Korean built statues of himself, as well as his own $1 million 90th birthday bash last month. The Christian Science Monitor reports. World at 8. I'm surprised the British government didn't contribute as well. They usually do, or perhaps they already have. Thought for the day. A total blackout on TV and a total takeover in the US. I watched the new series of Law & Order last night and was unpleasantly surprised by the fact it now apparently is an almost black show. In the opening credits the blacks outnumbered the whites by 2-1, and to see it, our plods are almost entirely staffed by ethnics or half-ethnics. I was also introduced to the lovely new gang word of shadist. This means in ethnic gibberish and mind-blowingly simple terms, the whiter a black is, the more his chance of becoming successful. The speaker didn't stipulate in what branch of society this would be, but we can take it that it is almost entirely in the acting profession. Now the one thought that occurred to me was not the barefaced anti-white racist bastards who cast these shows, or who are directed onto the diversity potty, but that we must be the only country in the world, excluding the US, that has almost every single programme, series, advert and news happily showing grinning dark faces obliterating the white ones. Do you switch on in China, India, Japan or Africa and see a plethora of white faces? Do ya? Do ya? No, because if you did, you'd be in the wrong country. In fact, you wouldn't even be in England either, matey, and that's the sad thing. I've nothing against seeing my black brothers, in roles that call for black brothers, and that effectively, in a sensible way, would and should exclude the replaying of the classics in which, apart from Othello, who was in fact a Moor, a North African personage, is the only dark-visaged persona in our Shakespeare's, Jane Austen's, Charlotte Bronte's, Charles Dickens and many more, excuse the pun. Although, In the recasting of many of these, the potty people have slipped in a half chat or two and one or two blacks slinking around in crowds in villages that would not have boasted any ethnics in those times. Multicultural claptrap to say any different, but of course the potty people do. It does, however, reflect the impact of immigration on our viewing and country in a very bad way. It's also getting us ready for the total genocide of our people, the white people or the Northern Europeans. Rarely do you see a blonde-haired, blue-eyed person who isn't playing a tart or a vulnerable person, any more than you see a white teenager playing anything other than a moron up to his ears in drugs or bad upbringing. In Law and Order, the good guys were the blacks and the Jews, and a white female judge, and the bad guys were the white guys, as usual intimidating and killing. All predictable and all boringly politically correct. Apparently immigration has cost Britain £140 billion since 1995, and this doesn't include the billions we've sent abroad either, and they wonder why it's racist to at least query this sum when the white way of life is fastly vanishing and the ethnic one is being encouraged and mentored by a lot of turkeys voting for Christmas. And we humans think real turkeys are dumb. We are infinitely dumber. The EU, that band of ever increasingly military-like junta-type generals, is announcing later this month on provisions of facilitating migrants' access to the labour market. Well, speaking personally, I would say nearly 70% of our blue-collar jobs are given to immigrants anyway, and the rest can cook up a pretty good story of disabled parents or children to get benefits and new homes anyway. What need have they to work? To cap it is the EU Commissar Viviane Reding has told the meeting of a new proposal for a common justice area by 2020. I presume the Commissar means that by that time we will all be mud-coloured, poor and have no families to tie us down to a particular country. The gem of gems comes from the US, that poor country that we have inflicted African blacks on due to, of course, Arab slavery. But there are millions of more blacks than could have bred from the original slaves, aren't there? So millions more must have come in during the ensuing couple of 100 years, and most of them in the last 50, I would like to bet. But their problem is not only the blacks, but the thousands of them that convert to Islam. Now that is the fashionable thing to do in the land that has suffered the worst terrorist atrocity in this and the last century, that of 9/11. All of the conspiracy theorists had said it was a homeland affair to make people dislike the Muslims have egg on their faces now, because their own president is a closet Muslim. He was born a Muslim, and once born a Muslim, like a Jew, you are always that person. Hell, they've even allowed the Muslims to build a mosque within the site of the old Twin Towers. How totally diverse is that? I'm reading part of an article written by Dr. Ashraf Esset on the Veterans Today site. Yet another peaceful Muslim with the doctorate of Allah knows what. And this is how he starts. If Catholics around the world do not deserve to be linked to Nazism simply because Hitler happened to be born Catholic, then Muslims around the world don't deserve to be linked to terrorism simply because Osama bin Laden, the leader of some fake terrorist organisation, happened to adhere to the extreme side of Islam. President Obama said that he supports the construction of a mosque near Ground Zero in New York, saying that opposing the project is at odds with American values. Let me be clear, as a citizen and as president, I believe that Muslims have the same right to practice their religion as anyone else in this country, he said at a White House ceremony marking the traditional breaking of the daily Ramadan fast, and added, that includes the right to build a place of worship and a community centre on private property in Lower Manhattan, in accordance with local laws and ordinances. President Obama refined his defence of the Ground Zero mosque the following day, saying his previous comment defended the right to build it, not the wisdom of its location. Esset goes on. How could it be possible for a religion that has been adopted by millions of ordinary and peaceful believers all over the world to be portrayed as inherently violent and extreme, and for Muslims to be characterised as incapable of being moderate or nor tolerant? How could a religion that has been coexisting with other creeds for 15 centuries now turn aggressively dangerous and intolerant overnight? Actually, it did not occur violent over ever given night. It was the night of the September 11th attacks on America. Esset is ignoring the obvious here in his diatribe against the American peoples, and that is, had 9/11 taken place in Dubai and a couple of those huge towering hotels and complexes had had full passenger planes flown into them by a Christian militia group, just how soon after that would the shite have hit every fan in the Western world, and indeed any country with a Muslim community? Answers on a postage stamp, please. NATO and the UN would have been having gibbering contests in spluttering out names for this action, as would the EU commissars. It is blinded liberals like Esset that give our diversity-ridden morons fuel for their fires and for their actions. I'm looking now at a picture of a fuzzy-headed black person wearing a 9/11 t-shirt with pride. We're constantly clubbed on the head with claims that the Muslim world condemned 9/11, abhors 9/11, etc. Yet every day shirts like this, portraying the actual time of impact, are mass-produced, marketed and sold by street vendors throughout the Middle East. And it's simply okay. The mass murder of 9/11 is a celebrated event by millions of people in Muslim countries throughout the world. But the White House is not lagging behind in the put a Muslim bum on a seat brigade, and so far they've done better than us. And I quote, "Look who's new in the White House. God help us, why don't we see this in the news anywhere? Keep praying. Makes US citizens literally sick, but remember who the Commander-in-Chief thinks he really is, God Almighty. Americans must not, dare not lose hope." Arif Ali Khan, Assistant Secretary for Policy Development for the US Department of Homeland Security. Mohammed Elibiari, Homeland Security Advisor. Rashad Hussain, Special Envoy to the Organisation of the Islamic Conference. Salam al-Mariyati, the Obama advisor and founder of the Muslim Public Affairs Council and its current executive director. Imam Mohammed Majid, Obama's Sharia Tsar from the Islamic Society of North America. Ibu Patel, Advisory Council on a Faith-Based Neighbourhood Partnerships. This is flat out scary. The foxes are now officially living in the henhouse. Now ask me why I'm very concerned. Do you feel okay with this? How can this happen and when will we wake up? We are quiet, shame on us, while America is being fundamentally and drastically changed, just like Obama promised before he was elected. This has already started in Australia as well. Dr Mehreen Faruqi making history by becoming the first female Muslim to be elected to Parliament in Australia. Faruqi was pre-elected by the Greens. Ed Husic, Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister and Parliamentary Secretary for Broadband, during the swearing-in ceremony at Government House by the Governor-General. He carried a copy of the Quran with which he was sworn in as Parliamentary Secretary. He even takes this Quran into Parliament. So looking at the general picture, you can see we are being taken over in the Western world, and it has reached the stage whereby the normal white man in the street is saying, "Don't want to have children, what sort of world is this to bring children into?" And, "Well, we can't do nothing about it, can we, Brigade?" They make me sick. It's never been a wonderful world for some people to bring children into, that world, but it is nature and it is in our genes to leave something behind. Fact. Besides, Europe is getting ready to train its troops and fight again against white neighbours like it did the Germans in 2 world wars. My advice, which will never reach the right people, is leave the Ukraine and the Crimea alone. Leave it to the Russians. Why should we bother with it? We have enough trouble within our own lands to occupy us, and any sensible government would see that. When, or if ever, heaven forbid, Muslims have taken over this small island, will anyone in Russia come to our aid? No, not if the EU or UN have anything to do with it. They won't. It'll be classed as a protest of a peaceful Muslim community against the racist bastards who gave them shelter in the first place, rather like Eastern Europe. The powers that be have taken the protester and turned them into a soldier of democracy. Pitiful is the word I'm looking for, and have found. Pitiful. And finally, a Halloween story, just a bit early. Bob Hill and his new wife Betty were vacationing in Europe, as it happens near Transylvania. They were driving in a rental car along a rather deserted highway. It was late and raining very hard. Bob could barely see the road in front of the car. Suddenly the car skids out of control. Bob attempts to control the car but no avail. The car swerves and smashes into a tree. Moments later Bob shakes his head to clear the fog. Dazed, he looks over at the passenger seat and sees his wife unconscious, with her head bleeding. Despite the rain and unfamiliar countryside, Bob knows he has to get her to medical assistance. Bob carefully picks his wife up and begins trudging down the road. After a short while he sees a light. He heads towards the light, which is coming from a large old house. He approaches the door and knocks. A minute passes. A small hunched man opens the door. Bob immediately blurts, "Hello, my name is Bob Hill and this is my wife Betty. We've been in a terrible accident and my wife has been seriously hurt. Can I use your phone?" "I'm sorry," replied the hunchback, "but we don't have a phone." "My master is the doctor. Come in and I will get him." Bob brings his wife in. An older man comes down the stairs. "I'm afraid my assistant may have misled you. I'm not a medical doctor, I'm a scientist. However, it is many miles to the nearest clinic and I have had a basic medical training. I'll see what I can do. Igor, bring them down to the laboratory." With that, Igor picks up Betty and carries her downstairs, with Bob following closely. Igor places Betty on the table in the lab. Bob collapses from exhaustion and his own injuries, so Igor places Bob on an adjoining table. After a brief examination, Igor's master looks worried. "Things are serious, Igor. Prepare a transfusion." Igor and his master work feverishly but to no avail. Bob and Betty Hill are no more. The Hill's death upsets Igor's master greatly. Wearily he climbs the stairs to his conservatory, which houses his grand piano. For it is here he has always found solace. He begins to play and a stirring, almost haunting melody fills the house. Meanwhile Igor is still in the lab, tidying up. His eyes catch movement and he notices the fingers on Betty's hands twitch, keeping time to the haunting piano music. Stunned, he watches as Bob's arm begins to rise, marking the beat. He is further amazed as Betty and Bob both sit up straight. Unable to contain himself, he dashes up the stairs to the conservatory. He bursts in and shouts to his master, "Master, master, the hills are alive with the sound of music." You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I and the team at World at 8 and Radio Britain wish you all a very happy and a very safe weekend. Ween joke. UK News. Rotherham's Brinsworth Manor infant and junior schools ban pork in favour of halal. Parents have condemned the school's decision to ban all pork products from the menu and replace other meats with halal versions. Pupils aged between 3 and 11 at Brinsworth Manor infant and junior schools in Rotherham, which Ofsted identifies as having only a small number of pupils from minority ethnic groups, will no longer be able to enjoy sausages, bacon or ham. Parents at both schools, which share a site, were told of the decision in a letter from Rotherham's Council's principal catering officer, Ron Parry, who wrote that there had been minor adjustments to the lunch menu. Although just 20% of the school's 600 pupils are Muslim, the menu changes were reportedly brought in to make the school more inclusive. A mother with an 11-year-old girl at the school who asked not to be named for fear of being branded racist said, "At home I pay more for organic and free-range food. I am a Christian but I don't do it because of that, it's more for respect of how animals are killed. The majority of the children are now having school meals that are made for the minority." World at 8. It is just plain disgusting and there should be massive protests, but of course there won't be. We just don't care anymore. The school had probably banned Pippa the Pig as well.
You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8. The number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Friday the 14th of March 2014. Rotherham's Brinsworth Manor infant and junior schools ban pork in favour of halal. Illegal immigrant robbed and raped woman in Plymouth. Nigel Farage denies being forced out of marital home after affair claims. Italy, prosecutor seeks 20-year jail term for pickaxe killer. Brussels frees up €12 billion for Italy. The Ukraine this week, independence, aggression, natural gas, water and electricity. Nick Griffin MEP from the belly of the beast. Alabama judge to lesbian couple, no, you can't divorce. Mugabe parties lavishly on broke Zimbabwe's dime daughter's wedding cost $5 million, his own birthday $1 million. Thought for the day, a total blackout on TV and a total takeover in the US. And finally, an early Halloween EU parliamentary assistant allowances that are worth almost £220,000. Miss Fuller is paid out of the allowance as a local assistant working at UKIP's London press office. World at 8. This is not the cons, as it has been well known in political circles for years how Farage treats his job as an MEP. Just about the same way he treats his women and some of his followers badly. It isn't an unsaid message that puts the pound sign on his party logo. He is at least being honest there. Feed me, people, feed me. Frankly, I cannot imagine any woman at any age being attracted to Farage, even if he was dual in every hole. European news. Italy prosecutor seeks 20-year jail term for pickaxe killer. Milan prosecutor Isidoro Palmer on Monday sought a 20-year jail term for Adam Kabobo, a Ghanaian man who killed 3 people with a pickaxe last year. The state attorney supported a defence plea of diminished responsibility and asked that the defendant, who has been diagnosed as schizophrenic, spend 6 years in a clinic after he serves his jail term. Murder Adam Kabobo went on a rampage with a pickaxe at dawn on May 11th, 2013, killing 3 passers-by in an apparently random attack. Illegal immigrant robbed and raped woman in Plymouth. An illegal immigrant was found guilty of raping and robbing a prostitute in Plymouth's red light area. Balen Wazoo, aged 22, violently attacked the woman after paying her for a sex act, the city's Crown Court heard. The Iraqi-born man faces a long jail term and deportation after a jury convicted him following a trial. Wazoo turned on the woman after he met her for sex at the streets in Stonehouse last year. He raped the prostitute, covering her mouth as she screamed for help. Wazoo then tried to snatch back money from her pocket, including the £50 he'd paid minutes before. He then bit the woman's hand when she tried to stop him. Wazoo of Bayswater Road, Stonehouse, spent a week on trial after denying rape and robbery. World at 8. She should have done the world a favour and bitten off something else. Nigel Farage denies being forced out of marital home after affair claims. His wife, Kirsten Mayer, who usually drives him to the station, was keeping a low profile following allegations that her husband had an affair with his press officer, Annabelle Fuller. Mr Farage, who was pictured carrying a bag outside his home in Kent, later denied he'd been kicked out by his wife after a fellow MEP claimed that his former mistress is on his taxpayer-funded payroll. The UK Independence Party leader said it was ridiculous and insane to suggest that he'd been asked to move out. "It's ridiculous," he said. "I left home at 11 o'clock, I came to work. This is completely insane. It is a load of whatevers." Meanwhile, a video emerged in which Mr Farage boasts about how he is paid more than a Goldman Sachs banker because he employs his wife as a secretary. The video, which dates from 1999, shows Mr Farage saying that everyone's a winner with Europe. The emergence of the video has fuelled UKIP concerns that the Conservative Party are orchestrating a smear campaign against Mr Farage and members of his party. In the video, Mr Farage is seen fanning himself with banknotes and criticising the expenses regime in the European Parliament. That for 4 working days and making one's journey he can claim £1,900. He adds, "It's a good job this. I worked it out that because so much of what you get is after tax, that if you use the secretarial allowances to pay your wife on top of all the other games you play, I reckon this job in sterling terms is worth over £250,000 a year to you. That is what you would need to earn working for Goldman Sachs or someone like that." Mr Farage's German-born second wife Kirsten Mayer is employed by him on a salary of up to £20,000 a year, using